Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. I'm joined today by Mr. Kyair Butts. Kyair is the 2019 Teacher of the Year for Baltimore City Public Schools, 2024 Extraordinary Educator from Curriculum and Associates, and 2023 to 24 Go in Literacy Fellowship Awardee. He teaches literacy at Henderson Hopkins Partnership School and is a teacher leader in the district, creating, facilitating, and leading district professional development centered on literacy and equity. Kyair also mentors young or new to profession educators. He's been featured in various education blogs, Goyen, Great Minds, The 74, Curriculum Matters, and literacy podcasts, Melissa and Lori Love Literacy, Knowledge Matters. For his work in urban literacy curriculum, especially science of reading and fluency, specifically his deep knowledge of wit and wisdom curriculum. Kyair is in his 10th year with Baltimore City Schools and continues to find joy in the classroom and his community. His students are potent motivators to continue in this work by continuing to fulfill a passion-driven purpose. Follow Kyair and his students on Twitter and on Instagram, and those addresses will be in the show notes. Good morning, Kyair. It's great to have you on Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and good morning to you too.
Yeah. I was so excited to have you on because I know that, as the people learned in your introduction, you focus on middle school literacy. And one of the things that, just to set some context, if you could describe your classes, their reading levels, maybe their self-images as learners when you
Yeah.
get them, kind of who you working with, what's your raw material as they come in?
Yeah, so one, again, truly thanks for having me. I love talking literacy. I love talking reading, and I love talking how we can make this love for reading just a ubiquitous feeling, right? Especially for middle schoolers. I teach seventh grade, so before folks start sending me their thoughts and prayers, I'd probably rather give you my Venmo or my Cash App handle. But I joke because it's such a formative time, right, for kids. I've got kids who, they're in seventh grade, right? So we're talking, 13 on the cusp of 14, maybe 12 into 13 years old. And there are a number of them, right, who are reading well below grade level. And we use an iReady diagnostic from Curriculum Associates. It's a progressive diagnostic. So I always like to think it's kind of like the three little bears. It's trying to figure out what is the just right reading level for students. We also use ANET from Achievement Network, which is a little more grade based, standards aligned, so students are receiving grade level content. I give those two assessments just to I kind of, again, give some background information on my students. I teach at a Title I school in Baltimore. Well over a majority of my students, in fact, all of them would identify as Black African American. And again, to your point, Gene, like I do have students, reading, four or more levels below grade level. Now, when the students come to me at the beginning of the year, it's fascinating because some are saying, "Hey, Mr. K, I heard that you're super mean. I heard that you're a mean teacher, that there's going to be a lot of work to do in your class." And it's a little funny because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I'm probably the softest person on the team. I'm just a really big teddy bear. But I'm adamant about maintaining high expectations, excuse me, and what students can do. And if we're not there, always emphasizing that we're not there yet. So again, kind of giving that pretext and that context to say, hey, I do have some students who are struggling. That's also okay. We spend a lot of time also working on fluency. And I am a huge believer in fluency because on the one hand, some teachers, in the sixth, seventh, eighth grade or higher might say to themselves, well, it's no longer my job to teach students how to read. right? I'm in a reading to learn grade, if folks still kind of use that phrase. I'm not in a learning to read grade. That should have been on the, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade teachers to teach those foundational skills. And what I would say is that, one, there's some moral abdication of the job, if that's what teachers are saying. It's not my job to, insert skill, and I'm not a big fan of that. But I would say that fluency is a great way for me to help try to bridge that gap to comprehension. And I know that's an oft-used phrase in literacy, bridging the gap between foundational skills, but kind of understanding Scarborough's rope and how these literacy skills intertwine. Fluency really does help bring students along who are now in seventh grade who do have some gaps in their foundational skills. So, Gene, when you ask me, what does my classroom look like? I have students in seventh grade clapping out words. They are literally syllabicating words. In fact, I recently, shameless plug, posted on Twitter or X, and there's a little snippet from my classroom. And you can see, even in this like very quick little 16 seconds, students are working in pairs and they are taking seriously reading a passage on the board. I bolded some multisyllabic words that were really just a review from our module overview, right? Why are we doing the power of language from Wit and Wisdom module 3? And students are clapping out words, political, right? And it's so fascinating to see them working together, what students were working together. And at no point, if you were to come into my classroom, would you see students kind of sitting back thinking, Mr. K, clapping out a word? Are you freaking kidding me? I'm 13 years old. This is beneath me.
Right. Okay, two things I have to tell you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Number one,
No, please.
there's no such thing as a shameless plug here. And then the other thing that a couple things I want you to clarify, but
Yeah.
you're kind of getting into this because one of the things that when kids reach that level, I mean, you've got all sorts of social, emotional things going on. So my
Yeah.
question is, and you talk about you get them and they're clapping out, the syllables. How do you get the kids to buy in that they're not only readers, but they're becoming literate after all of these years of proving that they're not?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I would say, and this is a huge point, right, Gene? Because I think a lot of teachers are asking themselves, Kier, what is it that you do to get this level of buy-in, right? Like you were just saying that they're 13 years old and there's not a single soul in your class who's thinking, this is beneath me. Why would I do that? And I think a lot of it is I just tap into their sense of pride, quite frankly, right? And I tell students, right, Kier, and I literally say my first name. I'm like, hey, Mr. K, Kier, he still follows along with a finger or pencil if he's at a professional development or a training and someone's doing some reading aloud. And I'm like, guys, I have two masters. Like, I'm pretty well read, and I really believe in the work from the student achievement partners, right? My good friends, Meredith and David Lieben, right? Like, they've done actual professional development at my school before, via Zoom, and it was great. I've worked with David several different times on various projects, and I believe in the research and what he says. Students that follow along, it's such a low lift task, can really improve their fluency. And I'm somebody who likes to explain the sort of the how, right, behind the what. What am I asking you to do? Well, I'm asking you to follow along, but why? And then that makes the implementation or the how just a little bit easier. So part of it, Gene, is just telling students, quite frankly, the research. I'm very honest with my students about the research and the why it matters. But because I've been teaching for a while, they also have friends of theirs who have had me before who are now in eighth grade or now in ninth grade at a different school. I've even had some siblings. So one of my students, we'll just call him M. I'll say, M, right? I'm so excited that you're investing in fluency as much as your sister did because when I had her in sixth grade, she did the same thing and she ended up growing 2 grade levels. I had her again in seventh grade and we got her to grade level reading. And little stories like that really push students to be like, wow, my sister did this, and like they know that their sister or their sibling is a better reader now. Now, not entirely because of me, because I also like to make sure that I'm giving that student they're just doing their credit too, but it's amazing. And I also sort of don't make it a choice to opt out, right? If we kind of go back to our classroom management days from way back when, right, in teacher school, no opt out is something I really believe in. Hey, we're all going to do this echo read because we're all going to become better readers. Better readers make for pretty darn good leaders in some cases. But I think the idea that we all want to be literate, we all want to enjoy this world. and we all want to communicate with folks and learn more, it's really important. So the buy-in piece is huge, tapping into that sense of pride, anecdotes over the years, and making sure that I can share the research with them.
Gosh, you're hitting on all of these things. How long you got? Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to expand upon is your no opt out, because I've heard you on other podcasts or I've read things that you've done, and I think the no opt out is one of those. That's how you operationalize high expectations. I mean, it's not, I expect you to do something, that I know you can't do
Yeah.
yet, but it is actually, I'm asking you to do things that you can do now. And my expectation and respect for you is you're going to do it now. We're going to get better every day. And I think that's one of those words it's one of those words that everybody uses,
Hmm.
but doesn't know what it looks like in the
Yeah.
classroom.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'm thinking about, and someone's going to be listening to this, and they're going to know. I want to say it's Alfie Cohen. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Carol Dweck, but I think it was Cohen, right? This idea of unconditional love. And now we might be thinking, okay, well, what does this have to do with no opt out? And I think that for me, I approach the classroom recognizing that, hey, we're not there yet. And that's okay. I'm not a perfect teacher. I'm really never going to be, but I'm going to always do my best to put you in positions to be successful, right? Like I like to think of myself almost, if we can use a sports metaphor, like a coach. I'm a big football fan. Coaches' jobs are to prepare a game plan, teachers, that's our lesson plan, and to make sure that the offensive players, your students, can implement that game plan with a high level of execution, but not just a high level of execution. Your players, students, have to not only be heavily involved in the game plan itself, especially those leaders on the team, maybe the quarterback or a star defensive player, your players also have to have a high level of confidence with the game plan. And this is why, when it comes to something like no opt out, we are now unpeeling, as Shrek would say, right? These onion layers of how you get a really good classroom. Well, part of it's having a really good game plan, lesson plan. Part of it is believing in your players, believe in your students, right? And then the Dweck or Cohen, I'm pretty sure it's Cohen, unconditional love is you approach your students with unconditional love. I understand that at some point, some teacher maybe didn't do the best that they could for you when it comes to reading, but I need you to understand that your brain works just fine. It does. Your brain needs a little bit of fine tuning. Your brain, much like my entire body, needs some working out, and I shouldn't be skipping leg day, right? But when we engage in these cognitive activities, reading, syllabicating, trying to do some deeper level of analysis, right? That's good for us. And it's okay that you don't know this word yet. That's why we're going to clap it out together so that we can start seeing how these words are formed and then blend them together, right? You might not know the word cataclysmic or how to say it, but I do know that you know how to say the word cat, which is the first syllable. So I think we can kind of finesse our way through the rest of it. And once students or our players start feeling really confident with the game plan, the buy-in's pretty easy. And then you see a really high level of execution. We're going out there and executing a really good game most days of the week. And I'm really proud of that.
And just to tack on one more thing to your analogy, as that teacher, you are doing your game plans, your lesson plans based on the strengths of those students to build on those, knowing that they have some deficiencies or some places where you're going to need to work hard,
Yeah.
but you always work that. Okay, great. Kara, you are awesome. Okay, we're back to fluency where I wanted to go. Can you talk
Yes.
about, because it is again, it's another word that we use
Yeah.
because it's so what does fluency look like for you in the middle school? What does it look like how you remediate it or you work on the fluency? What are some of the things that you do? You mentioned the clapping things out, but what else do you do for fluency?
So one thing that I'm really proud of, and if I've stolen it from somebody, I really apologize, but also not really, because that's what everybody does in teaching, and that's what makes us all better teachers. But one thing that I will say that I have implemented more so than a lot of other teachers that I've heard is literacy teachers use annotating. Now, when I first came into education in 2012, The school that I was working at, my very first school, they had the Maryland State Department of Education coming in. It was a district-wide initiative, and we had a coach, and they were helping us really improve the reading scores in Baltimore City, or at least from what I can recall. And one of the women that we were working with, she had us go through, text to text connections, text to self, text to world. And we were really pushing this word metacognition. And kind of like you were saying, Gene, there's a lot of words that we say in education that folks don't know what they mean, but we say them because they're cool.
Yeah.
Well, metacognition was the word in 2012 and 13 in literacy, from what I can remember in my personal experience. The idea was we get students thinking about their own thinking. Now, I don't inherently disagree with that at all. In fact, what I've done, I would like to say that I've done now over the course of 10 years in the classroom, honestly, primarily and only as a literacy or a reading or ELA teacher, whatever term we're using, is how do we expand on students thinking about their thinking from a comprehension standpoint? And what if we sort of retract and kind of go backwards a little bit? And now, what if we layer in a whole other layer of annotation symbols? So, follow me here. Students read a passage and they are now tracking their thinking, circling words that they don't understand. So, usually we'll have students circle a word that they don't understand, maybe put a question mark, maybe star words that they think are important. In Wit and Wisdom, and during the notice stage or the wonder stage, rather, they do a lot of notice and wonder. So they might put an in or a question mark. What did they notice or wonder, respectively? Okay, well, that's great. I love it. I still do it. But all of that is around comprehension. What do students understand? The point, though, Gene, is how do we get students to think about how can I read the what better? So then I've layered in this whole set of fluency annotation symbols. Where would you maybe put a slash or like a backslash, I guess, if it was a keystroke and they were doing this online, to really emphasize pause? Where would you underline a word because you're like, I should emphasize that word? Again, shameless plug, but if you were to go to Twitter right now, at KYAIRB, at KYRB, you found the most recent tweet that I posted. Not only do you see a little, 16-second clip of my kids, clapping it out and syllabicating, you also then, there's a link to a student who reads fluently, and then she goes a step further. She's explaining her fluency annotation symbols and how they helped her read better, right? So when we're talking, Gene, about fluency and the buy-in, students are now slowing down, marking up their paper, not necessarily to help them understand what they are reading better, but so that they can understand how it should be said. Noticing, is it dialogue? Is it narration? Was there a period versus a punctuation versus a comma versus an ellipsis, right? Was there an em dash or a hyphen of some sort? Oh, what verb should I be looking at? So we have a routine in my classroom where after students complete their table of contents to organize their notes, we go over our learning goals and our learning target for the day. We immediately jump into what I call a focus on fluency. There's usually a sentence or two. The first step is to write that down. The second step, after they've written that sentence down in their reading journals, is to identify any important word, any important phrase, or punctuation marks. Then they work with an elbow partner to identify what is the main idea or maybe the subject of that sentence or the main idea of that particular passage. Lastly, they then have to annotate using fluency symbols. Where would you raise your voice for vocal inflection? Where might you change up the prosody, the pacing, given what it is that you're reading? So now students have to understand, oh, well, the passage that I read sounded like somebody was in distress. So maybe I want to read with some urgency. Maybe I want to slow it down. Maybe I want to sound sad, like I was the person going through the hardship. And you can hear that when students are having these elbow partner conversations. Okay, well, now that you know what you're reading, the fourth step is how does knowing what you read affect how you read?
Okay. So you got my head spinning here, Kyair. Lots of questions. So let's start with um, the teachers listening to this,
Hmm.
and they say, "Oh man, I want to be like Kyair." Okay, so I'm going to start doing this. What should the expectation be when they start? What did you have to do lay any groundwork for this? Any instruction? How much instruction in this? Because so many times you hear a good idea, go to a conference, you hear something,
Yeah.
that didn't work the way I thought it was because they didn't. understand what the progression needed to be.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing that I did, quite frankly, was I just took it back to basics with students, right? The cat walked. Okay, what happened in this sentence? And students tell me, okay, great. What's the subject of the sentence, right? And I just literally, it was the cat walked, literally just one word. And so what we do almost at this point, and some folks, I say old heads, and I say that very lovingly and I hope respectfully, because I like to consider myself one too, is it's just sentence diagramming at that point, right? You can just take in a very basic sentence subject, verb. Maybe if you want to throw in an adverb or two and a couple of adjectives just to kind of spice up the sentence, because it could kind of change like what is being read. But if you just said, unfortunately, right, the sentence could be, my dog passed away. Okay, like what is happening in this sentence? Talk to kids. Now, if you were saying that, how would you feel? Okay, so like let's say maybe kind of sad. So if there's any teacher that's listening to this out there, I would say the first step is just explain to your students what fluency is. Fluency is something that helps us read a little more smoothly so that we can ultimately understand what it is that we read. Fluency definitely is a little like math in that we want to make sure that when we see a word, we recognize it automatically, right? So there's automaticity. We know automatically in less than a second, one plus one is two. And I'll do that with my seventh graders when I talk about fluency. Hey guys, what is one plus one? Cool. How long did it take your brain? And most of them are like, I just know it. Well, same thing with word automaticity. When you see a word, how quickly does your brain recognize it, right? Pacing. How fast or slow should we be reading? Now, for anybody out there that's saying that, fluency is, read fast, what good is reading fast if you don't understand what you read? That would be my pushback. And then prosody. There is a component of comprehension to prosody because I don't really know too many people who would want to read in a happy tone. My dog died and sound happy about that, so I think that's where we get a little bit of comprehension as well. So the first step again, Gene, for those teachers out there is let's just explain what fluency is, what it is and what it ain't, as I like to say. And I'm very transparent with my students about it. There's an anchor chart in class with the three components of fluency. Cool. Now, let's start to layer in just one or two sentences at a time, very basic. What's happening in this sentence? What's the subject of this sentence? How would you read this sentence? And then from there, I really just start scaffolding up. One sentences becomes two, two becomes now, instead of just no dialogue, I throw in some dialogue. Now it's some dialogue with maybe an internal monologue where I italicize it. And again, there's a lot of this already on X or Twitter that I've, posted. But you're right. You want it to be easy for teachers. And if anything else, here's something that's super low leverage that doesn't add a disproportionate amount of time for your students. If you're like, here, that idea sounds great, I still need a little more time or practice. Okay, that's okay. Go back to your learning goals. How do you share with students what the learning is for the day? My students, I'll call on one volunteer to read the learning goal out loud. Today we will. Then that student actually counts down from three and will choose to either lead the class in a choral read or tell the class, I'm going to lead you all in an echo read. Two very easy fluency strategies, choral reading and echo reading, that a student can just lead. And now that is part of your fluency routine every day.
Well, you've got confidence. I'd hate to hear them read that learning goal in a sad voice. And say, okay, so I heard you someplace talking about a new curriculum that was scripted, and you found it freeing. Do I remember that correctly? Do you remember you
Boy,
talking
well, I
talking about
definitely
that?
remember this. This is a little funny. This is when you know that you're with some experts because you've done your homework. Yes. So ultimately, just to contextualize, right? Baltimore City, a majority of Baltimore City public schools, I shouldn't say that all of them, but the school that I'm at, I guess I'll speak my singular truth, is that the school that I'm at uses a curriculum from Great Minds. It's their humanities or their lit curriculum called Wit and Wisdom. And it is a knowledge building curriculum. It's standards aligned, it's research backed and based. It's also written by teachers, you know. And what I would say is that it is a scripted curriculum insofar as, yeah, there are suggested questions to ask. There is a scope and sequence that is aligned for you in what's called the module map and where should you be going, what is the assessment. But it's an integrated approach to literacy, right? So your writing is embedded in the content or the stuff, I guess, or the comprehension that your students are learning. The anchor text really drive the questions and the learning and the module themes. And there are some amazing module texts that students are reading. Now, I would not fare well, if I'm being honest, at a school that was direct instruction, DI. And I had to have my script in my hand and walk around up and down these rows, more proctor than teacher, reading from my script with very little flair. I know we're doing a podcast, so folks might not be able to see my face, but like I look nothing like Miss Frizzle, but I do embody her spirit quite well. And I say all that to say that I just don't think that at whatever school Miss Frizzle was at in the animated show that they were doing direct instruction. And I just don't think that she would do well. And neither do I. I need to have some sense of like creative freedom if I know that this is what my students are capable of doing and I can swap out an instructional routine. And to me, the beauty of Wit and Wisdom is that one, I really like planning now. You know, the content, the module themes are incredible. I love starting the year off in seventh grade talking about identity. I love starting the year off not only talking about identity, but power structures, hierarchies, and how does society kind of enhance and limit our sense of identity. One, really prescient for right now in 2025. But more so than that, students are becoming the people who they just might be forever. And identity is such a huge role in who we are and how we show up and why we show up. And I love that in Wit and Wisdom, that's what they do. Now, I've got some freedom within that, right? To kind of, build a longer runway or an on-ramp to learning, right? Within Wit and Wisdom. But when I follow the scope and sequence, I can vary a question, I can change an instructional routine. But when I stick to the integrity of what the lesson is, it is freeing. And I think that the context, Gene, right, that you're thinking of, from an interview or maybe a blog that I wrote years ago, was this idea of as a first year teacher, I taught fourth and fifth grade. Baltimore City at that time had a separate vocabulary curriculum, a separate comprehension curriculum, a separate foundational reading skills curriculum, and a separate writing curriculum. So it was like writing, vocabulary, foundational skills comprehension. I think I repeated one of those, but basically four different parts. I was a first year teacher, so my head was already spinning, right? Having four different things to prep, and then also two different grades with four things each to prep. I'm not good at math, but suffice it to say, that was a lot for me as a first year teacher. With a curriculum such as Wit and Wisdom, my lessons are sort of quote unquote done. What I need to do now is internalize that lesson and think about how to present that material to students, but because the material is also to me so engaging, talking about identity in the Middle Ages, making connections to past and present, right? We're in right now the throes of Module 3, talking about how powerful language is, reading Animal Farm, but then bringing in some examples from Baltimore City and, famous Baltimoreans and slam poetry. And it's Black History Month. Like there's just so much to do that I feel I actually like planning. And I know that's kind of like a weird thing for a teacher to say because I don't hear teachers ever saying, I love planning, but I really do like planning. And maybe the difference or the nuance in Wit and Wisdom is I'm not planning, the plan's done for me. Now I get to internalize. And I think what some coaches would say, right? If we go back to the football
Yeah.
analogy, I think that some coaches would say, you know what, the planning part could be kind of fun, but it's internalizing the game plan and thinking about the execution that's also exciting and freeing as well. How are my players going to respond to this if I present it this way? So, yes, a lot goes into the quote unquote game plan and the lesson plan, but as a coach, teacher, I really like thinking about how am I going to internalize this best for student execution?
My feelings about the scripted programs, exactly the way you feel, like, man, I would have put me in there. I would, me in this lesson. And I write a couple books about instruction and coaching. And guess what I do? I put in those, I put in those pages, say this,
Yeah.
say this. You could say it every time. It works every time. But again, it's getting you to that point that you talked about. So now I've internalized it. I understand why this works. I could tweak it a little bit. I can still accomplish what I want to accomplish. But
Exactly.
I think you made a good point is that, you know, and I don't know how we do this, is, to get the first year teachers to realize you're not less than. You're not
Yeah.
less than if you do this. These people spent a lot of time. It will work. And guess what? You'll put a smile in there sometime when you want it,
Yeah.
or however you want to do it. But I agree with you that, it's just easier to start. And if you're an assistant coach, let's get back to football.
Yeah.
If you're an assistant coach and you're teaching you're coaching the wide receivers and you know the game plan, guess what? You're doing exactly what the head coach told you to do.
Yeah, well,
It is.
but that's the beauty of it, and I think about, the school that I'm at and the team that I've got. I think about our social studies teacher, world history, I guess, is actually the content that he teaches, our math teacher and our science teacher. While we're not all teaching the same content, obviously, it's nice that at least again at my school, we have a period called acceleration, right? So students are getting, what they need. We're able to remediate, some skills. And what's great is that I can extend and do a little bit more fluency. So when I include my teammates on, hey, we're going to work on fluency. These are some things that I would like you to look for when when I pass out this sheet, when hands are going up. We actually co-teach. So what's fascinating on my team is we have this extra period at the end of the day from about 3 to 3:50. And again, it's called acceleration. We have about 70 students in seventh grade split across, four teachers. But at the end of the day, we actually all come together, all 70 students, all four teachers, and we co-teach. And a lot of times there is a big focus on fluency, and I'm leading 70 students, but it's great to have my other co-teachers, and like you said, right, my assistant coaches in this case, understand the game plan. That way they know what fluency should look like. And then, of course, because there's actually been a school-wide push at my school for teachers to, across content areas to push fluency. What's great is then my teammates get to see me teaching fluency, and they can also take that back to their classroom and use fluency in the math classroom, right? Reading and understanding word problems, circling words that they don't understand. And of course, I hope we all know how important it is for science and social studies teachers to have just a little bit of knowledge for fluency because it's going to help their students understand their content a lot better. And that's also where students get exposed to a lot of tier two and tier three vocabulary.
Oh, oh man. Okay, so again, I'm spinning. So let's go back to fluency a little bit, but I want to
Yeah.
talk about it in the context of technology because you mentioned they would annotate for fluency. They would do this paper pencil, but if they were on a computer, they would do this. So how much technology do you use in your class in this remedial class, remedial literature,
Yeah,
literacy?
well, what's fascinating is so every student does this. It is a daily expectation for me. As I'm doing my lesson plans, the focus on fluency, it's there all the time. Like we're always doing something related to fluency, some passage. Recently, I unfortunately cannot pronounce this guy's name, but my honors classes are working, with the quote that is a partial quote that begins, "Sometimes fate is like a small sandstorm that keeps changing directions. You change direction, but the sandstorm chases you. Over and over, you play this out like some ominous dance with death just before dawn. Why? Because this storm isn't something that blew in from far away, something that has nothing to do with you." And the quote goes on. And I really enjoy that quote. But I sort of recite that to say students continue to work with that quote. And what's fascinating is when they give each other feedback, we do so much. They read to the wall, they whisper read to themselves, they do the buddy reading, they read from the board, we choral read as a class, a lot of strategies. But what's fascinating is Morgan, a student I had last year, said, "Mr. K, I think the key to reading this fluently is to pretend that you're the person going through a sandstorm." And I was like, "Morgan, that is brilliant feedback for the class because this is an extended metaphor." And it was great. And then I had, I kind of was like, did a little warm call. I said, "Morgan, I want you to share that with your classmates when we're done." And ever since then, it was fascinating to hear students go back and read that because they're like, wow, okay, not a literal sandstorm. Got that from some of the context clues. So notice how many literacy strategies you're bringing in, right? How many skills are being worked on, figurative language, this extended metaphor, pretend like you're the person going through it. Now, to your point about technology, I was made aware of a website, probably at a conference, I'm sure. I'm unfortunately forgetting which, but Vocaroo, Vocaroo.com, Vocaroo.com. Very easy recording website. In fact, I actually just posted this to Google Classroom the other day when Baltimore City had a snow day. And I had my students read a little passage, just a very short passage that I actually created. It was, wait, wait. Carson screamed at the taxi cab driver that clearly ignored him. I hate living in New York City, Carson thought to himself. So I type that, and students go to Vocaroo and they read that. Now, part of the thing that they did, and again, if you go to Twitter or X, you can literally hear a student not only read that little snippet that I wrote myself, but like again, you can hear her talk about her symbols. Where did she pause? Why did she pause? And I like to make sure that students can also hear themselves read. Back in the day, I think it was PVC pipe or whatever, and you got the like elbow PVC pipe so kids could like almost hear themselves talk as they spoke into some plastic piping. Now, of course, we have Chromebooks and these really cool fancy websites. And I just have kids record themselves. It's just their voice. They'll read it and then they send it to me on our school approved one-stop shop app called Clever, right? So then, it was fat. It was so cool on Wednesday to just get a flurry of messages from students on Clever sending me their recording link. And I thought to myself, wow, like it really just made my heart grow a couple more sizes. It was just really cool to see students engaging with the fluency work on a snow day and sending me messages. Hey, Mr. K, how does this sound? Like they were giving each other feedback. You could hear, family members in the background. It was just a really cool feeling.
Any other things you use it for? You limit the technology in the classroom, or
Yeah,
because this is
I'm
a big deal. This is a big deal now.
yeah, it
As
is.
yeah.
Well, so Vocaroo I definitely use a lot of in the classroom. It's fascinating. Yesterday was a PD day for us in Baltimore City. So one of the sessions I actually went to at my own school was about AI use. And I do know that Curriculum Associates is actually in the throes of releasing a newer version of iReady. I learned this at one of their conferences I went to for extraordinary educators last summer. And I'm excited that there's going to be a fluency component that's got a lot of AI help and support to make fluency instruction easier for students and foundational reading instruction easier for teachers. That can really give teachers some fantastic data, give some students some really good feedback. So I'm excited to learn more about iReady Pro and learn how to implement that in the classroom and do more fluency assessments, assessing a whole class at the same time so that a teacher doesn't have to do, I test Jean, then I test Sally, then I test Kier, that one at a time. That takes a lot of instructional minutes away. But I believe what I remember from the iReady conference was that iReady Pro, one of the features would actually allow teachers to assess an entire class at the same time and get that data pretty immediately. And then teachers get to decide, how do I use this feedback? How do I use this data and how do I share it with students? So I'm excited to continue learning more about technology implementation, especially as it relates to AI. I still think that a teacher's ear is going to be the best to give that fluency feedback for students. But I think that again, iReady Pro or other systems out there that can assess students quickly, but also get some meaningful data and the whole class at the same time, as opposed to I need to devote 5 minutes to every student to read this passage, score it in an Excel spreadsheet. I'm hoping that those days are long gone because, that does eat up at class time and instructional minutes.
Let's switch gears again. Like, it's something that I heard you say that I would love to hear you expand on, and that is that we have veteran teachers, experienced teachers in schools, and they're not being utilized. They want to be able to provide more support. They want to be able to help folks at their school, but they're just not called on.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a wealth of knowledge that veteran teachers have, mostly because there's been there, done that. But you and I were talking about this a little earlier, is that veteran teachers, and really I would say all teachers, but because, we're going to localize the question to veteran teachers, they want to see their students do well. And in a lot of cases, a veteran teacher, could have taught that same student that the new teacher has. If you have a veteran teacher who's been teaching, fourth grade forever, and you have a new seventh grade teacher, well, that fourth grade teacher knows that seventh grader, depending on the school context. But in, my particular school, yeah, if we've had somebody there for a while, then they know that teacher. So I think one of the things is how do we get these, teachers in the frame more? How do we really help them? And veteran teachers could be coaches, they could be mentor teachers, content leads, right? And if you were to pair them strategically, allow them to just sometimes just give unsolicited advice. I think another thing that I've been really wanting to push at the particular school that I'm at is just making sure that we have time for teachers to observe each other. Now, a lot goes into that. Do you have a school culture where teachers feel comfortable feeling observed? It's non-threatening, and again, a lot goes into that. But if you have those systems or structures in place, that culture settled, it's so valuable for folks to go see each other. I actually spend my planning period usually going to elementary and trying to queue it up so that I can see an elementary teacher doing phonics or a foundational reading skill so that I can take that back to my seventh grade classroom. So I typically like to go to the elementary classrooms. And it's important for veteran teachers, to feel comfortable opening up their classrooms just to make sure that, again, all kids deserve a really good teacher.
think you said something that I think begs the question, and that is we need to have a culture in the schools that this happens. And I think I see a lot of things about maintaining a culture and, making sure that the culture continues, but not a lot about developing that culture because I think it is developable, if that's a
Yeah.
word. There are some specific things that we can do. And I think the big thing that we need to do, whether it's an administrator, whether it's a coach, whether it's whomever, is that there's a directive from the principal that says, you know what, we're going to learn from you. And the only way we can learn from you is to visit your classroom.
Yeah.
So our instructional coach or AP, whoever it is just going to be visiting classrooms, not to evaluate you, not to just to see what's going on, because
Yeah.
everybody has something to share. And until you have developed that it's comfortable for people to walk through your classroom, then that other culture isn't going to exist because
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
always an expectation that, okay, why are they here? Why are they here?
Yeah. Well, and again, hopefully we haven't used our football metaphor too much, but but I think that it even goes back to veteran players, and I follow the NFL a lot, maybe too much so, but I would say though that at least for me, I hear a lot of talk about, oh, well, it's the quarterback, right? He's, the first in, last out. And you've got other players on the team, that veteran presence, on the team, they lead by example. And I think that part of it's that too. I think part of it is you develop that school culture by having veteran teachers say, no, please come see me. I'm doing this strategy. I'm using this instructional routine. I want you to see my management. I want you to see how I build relationships in the classroom. So almost sort of like a football team, so goes the quarterback, so goes the team, or these other veteran leaders. I think schools can operate in a similar fashion where if you get some buy-in from the veterans, now you have a player-centered team, and I think, you see on a lot of these successful teams, the Eagles, the Chiefs, Bills, whatever it is. And there are some,
49ers.
yeah, definitely the 49ers, like there are definitely player-centered teams where you hear that, yeah, they've got a great football coach in place. But I think, if we are talking about like the 49ers, Brock Purdy's growing into that role. George Kittle is one of those guys. You've got Debo, right? You've got Fred Warner. Like you just have playmakers or veteran teachers littered all over the building. How do we let those veteran teachers really come to the fold and really take a step up? Because it shouldn't always be the head coach, aka the principal, with a top-down directive, because at times that does feel a little micromanagey. But if you've got a veteran teacher saying, you know what, hey, I actually want you to come into my classroom. I've got a new teacher on my team. He's a first year teacher, and he with his coach have been able to come see me. I think the co-teaching in the afternoon really helps. And then always just kind of asking, hey, is there anything that you need? Is there anything you want to see? What in your teacher practice, as of February might you be struggling with? And I think it also just means people being open-minded. A lot of that, is also just us understanding each other as people. Do we have enough time on task to understand who's in our building? What teachers do we have? What experiences have they gone through and then value those experiences?
Absolutely. Kyair, what a joy. And I tell you, I was a former football coach, so you can't use too many football metaphors.
I love it.
Advice to teachers, something they should start doing, something they should stop doing.
Yeah. Well, I think if we're thinking about fluency, stop putting too much emphasis on read fast because then a student's going to be thinking to themselves, well, one, speed reading is great, but then two, do I remember? Do they remember what they just read? So let's stop overemphasizing pacing or how fast students are reading. Let's start implementing low level fluency routines, right? I think that you've got some low hanging fruit that tastes pretty good at the end of the year if you're interested in your student reading data. So let's go for the low hanging fruit. Maybe just to start, I'm not saying you need to implement fluency annotation symbols in your classroom or anything like that. That'd be awesome and super great. I'd love for more people to do that. But let's just start with you, the teacher, leading an echo read of the learning goal that day. Maybe identifying a few important words in that learning goal to syllabicate and clap out. Let's also start with the mindset that the fluency strategy, as it's written in the Common Core standards, one, if I'm correct, shows up in fifth grade and does not show up again after that. So fluency really is an up through fifth grade standard. But sixth, seventh, eighth grade teachers and beyond, just because it stops in fifth grade doesn't mean that you shouldn't still be emphasizing RF5, whatever, which is reading foundational skills fifth grade. Then I forget the substandard. But you should still keep doing that. Also, when I read the standard, here's what's also important to note for students, and I literally tell this to my kids. Let's say, Gene, you're reading something, you stumble over a word, and you go back and self-correct. Here's what's great about the standard: you're allowed to go back and self-correct and still be considered a fluent reader. So I like to emphasize to my students, yeah, it's okay that maybe the cup wasn't completely secured in the car and a little bit of water spilled out when you went over the speed bump. There's still water in the cup, which is to say, if you hit a speed bump word, an obstacle word, and you go back and you suss your way through cataclysmic because you know that the first syllable is cat, as long as you can self-correct and read it somewhat smoothly after that, you're still considered a fluent reader according to the standard, and the standard is excellence.
I think great advice. Great advice, Kara. I want to piggyback on one thing that you said. You have promoted several strategies that you would think would be, you would see in first grade, second grade, et cetera. And I think many teachers, when they get to the middle grades or even high school, think, oh, this is kid stuff. The kids aren't going to respond. Guess what? We're going to do choral reading. They respond. I
Yeah.
watched an P teacher, all her classroom management stuff was from kindergarten.
Yeah.
And guess what? The students responded.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
if
Absolutely. I
it,
think that
yeah.
stickers can still be effective. A good old fashioned high five or a fist bump can still be effective. But I think the other part that is important is telling a student, Gene, I care about you. I respect you. Here is why we're doing this. Fluency is a great way for us to build our reading comprehension, to learn more vocabulary, and ultimately to become better readers. Here's what the research says, right, class? Okay, now that we understand what it says, let's just give it a try. I'm going to say the word. I want you to repeat the word, and then we're going to clap the word out together. Here we go. Cataclysmic. Okay, after me. Excellent. Now clap it out. And then kids really like it. And then, of course, in seventh grade, I kind of gamify it a little bit, but it's not even a game, it's more of a gimmick. Then I just go really fast through the words. So if I have seven words bolded, I'll just start saying, okay, here we go. I say it, you say it, clap it out. Greeting, great. And then I just kind of see how fast we can say it. And because they're kids, they think it's the funniest thing in the world.
Yeah.
It costs me nothing. And I just start saying the words faster and then going out of order to trip them up. That's it. They think it's
Yeah.
silly. We're having fun. And now there's buy-in. Now the cool kid is clapping and so is Mr. K. And we're all having a fun time. But just like gamifying anything, students are learning. I don't care how we do it, right? Any coach would tell you, right? It doesn't matter if we win by a field goal, we score on a safety, or we blow them out. I just want the win. And for us, winning means that the hard work translates into heart work. Our kids are going to become better readers. That's good for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, let's leave it there with you, Kier. That was great. Well, do you have a question for me?
I think one of the big ones is, so how do we kind of continue to use this platform, right? And it might have changed. But I want to know, how can we help more teachers, with the mindset that understanding literacy takes everybody, right? Maybe some buy-in from the math teacher, the science teacher. What more can we be doing? Should we be doing?
Well, I think it goes back to, prior, prior time in this conversation. And that is number one, knowing what everybody does already. Knowing you don't have to be a content expert. Again, this could be an administrator, this could be an instructional coach, whatever the structure is within your classroom. But if I know how Kyair does something, if I know how, and then I go into a math class and I see how this math teacher does something, and then I go into all these classrooms, it may be that what we ask them to do differently is just a little tweak. If they understood. Let me give you an example. I was working
Hmm.
at a middle school with the math teachers, and one of the things that I had suggested to them is, a simple turn and talk.
Yeah.
And that you go, oh, it would take me forever to teach this to those guys. This was like over 50% second language learners. And so all of those strategies were all the kids knew them. They wouldn't even
Yeah.
they all they would need to say is who's your partner? Who's going first? Okay, here we go, turn and talk. But they didn't know that
Yeah.
because they didn't know what else was going on. So I think that's the first step. Again, understanding what everybody does, because we all went to the we're all we're not saying we're all going to the same conferences, but there are so many things that we're already doing
Yeah.
in a similar fashion. And if we're not, either somebody's outstanding or they really suck because there's all because there's not that
Yeah.
big, much of a variability in what's going on. So that would be my suggestion. And it's just like you said about your kids, knowing your kids, loving your kids. We don't have to love the staff, but you have to love them in the sense that I want to get to know how they are doing professionally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so funny. It's like, the school that I'm at, to your point, right? They said, you know what? We believe in fluency. How can we get more teachers to understand fluency? So one of the days they got coverage for every teacher in the building, and somebody designed a schedule so that I got to see all the social studies teachers at one time, and then their class was covered for 30 minutes, all the ELA teachers, so on and so forth. Everybody had coverage that day for their assigned 35 minutes. And they did a mini PD with me on fluency. First, the feedback was great. The teachers loved having 30 minutes that they could be covered to do PD during the day. Second, they loved being treated as professionals. Their time was respected and valued, their class was covered, and that they had an opportunity to learn that something that could make their classroom better. And what's great is somebody who's on my team now, but wasn't on my team last year, said, when this was a push last year, our school didn't do it so well. The school just said, hey, do fluency, Mr. So and so. This year, Mr. So and so was on my team, and he said, you know what? Thanks to this PD, I actually get it. I feel more comfortable. I feel more confident. I understand how I can do this now in my classroom and how it is low leverage. I just needed to see it. I just needed to sit down and not be told, hey, Gene, do fluency, but rather, Gene, maybe we can implement one of these three strategies like Kier talked about today. So I think that that's really helpful. And even math teachers were saying the same thing. You never know what strategy is going to be good for your kids until you try it. And again, kind of like high school or middle school, don't assume that your kids are going to think that clapping or syllabicating is beneath them or choral reading is beneath them. I think that mindset really matters. And a lot of folks are going to tell you that if you think something is stupid, your disposition is going to come off as it's stupid and beneath you, and your
Yeah.
students are going to see right through that. But if you say, hey, this is part and parcel, this is what we do, oh, hey, there's no alternative. This is what we do.
Yeah. This is what we do, and this is how you become successful.
That's right.
All right. Kiara, it has been an absolute pleasure, and it was great to finally meet you.
Thank you so
So,
much. I appreciate the time.
if you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused Adaptable Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles. Talk to you soon.